A copy of Sheltered 2 was provided for me by the publisher for the purpose of review. I reviewed Sheltered 2 while playing on a variety of difficulty settings. Sheltered 2 is a colony survival game where you guide a newborn faction aiming to conquer or unite 6 other factions in a bid for supremacy. You get to decide what type of faction you want to run with a fully customized leader. But before you can even think about your quest to rule the wasteland, you have to learn to survive in the first place. Sheltered 2 feels like an interesting combination of several other games. The Sims meets RimWorld with a healthy splash of Fallout Shelter and oxygen not included. The result is something that feels unique. The strategies you use to survive differ from them all. In particular, a single game of Sheltered 2 will make an episode of Hoarders look like minimalists. Even the most mundane pieces of junk can and will be vital to your survival. Survival games are my jam. I'm practically an expert in the genre by now, and yet I failed time and time again. Any old habits I had from games like RimWorld had to be tossed aside because while Sheltered 2 wears the skin of other colony sims, the fleshy bits underneath are an entirely different beast. Your overall goal isn't to just survive, it's to consolidate power, take over territory, and ultimately rule the wasteland. You accomplish this using diplomacy, violence, or a mixture of both. Sending expeditions out in the world is just as important as actually running your underground shelter. It's out there that you will find the items crucial to your survival. And by those, I'm talking stray wires, old crates that can be broken down, plastic jugs, nuts and bolts, and anything that we may take for granted in real life. Not only are these things important, you almost never have an ongoing supply of them. Many builder-type games can be solved by creating infinite resources from nothing, and that is rarely the case here. Every bit and bob is acquired by going out in the world and gathering them, trading for them with your other valuable gizmos, or by dismantling another item. Your stock of supplies is always dwindling, and everything is always in demand. The scarcity makes Sheltered 2 a micro-heavy game. A lot of your time will be spent in menus sorting through and managing junk, anything from pipes, bulbs, glass shards, circuit boards, whatever. It's heavy-handed, but it actually works in the game's favor, assuming you want this kind of survival experience. You have to manage and keep track of these items because it's crucial to planning your long-term survival strategy. You need to know exactly what you can afford to build using a hodgepodge of very specific parts. Planning ahead isn't just a suggestion, it's mandatory, even on lower difficulties. Every mechanic of the game is interwoven in some way that affects your faction's ability to survive. You need water, which is primarily gathered with your water collector and purifier when it rains. Survivors also need food, and while growing vegetables with seeds might seem like a no-brainer, watering the plants consumes that precious liquid, as does showering or using a toilet. Survivors get more sustenance out of food by cooking it, but many early recipes consist of soups that also take water. You might not have much trouble in the rainy spring, but what about when summer rolls around and the days between rainfalls are farther apart? So maybe you cut back on water use, but then winter comes, and growing food outdoors is a no-go. Do you have enough water to keep the indoor greenhouses watered, or did you store enough food to make it through the cold season? Don't forget about power. Electricity is required for anything from simple lights to indoor greenhouses to the shelter's oxygen generator. A windmill can generate power but is unreliable and needs batteries to store the energy to really take advantage of it. A generator is more reliable but continually needs gasoline. An incinerator can burn anything for power from coal to wood and even the corpses of invaders. But finding things you're willing to burn is difficult because every single piece of the survival puzzle eats away at your hoarded junk. This is all without taking into account the physical and mental needs of your survivors. Each of them has a different personality, the need for equipment so that they can defend the shelter and fight while exploring, or the supplies your potential allies may request of you. There is never a moment in Sheltered 2 where you will just sit and stare at the screen while things progress. You will constantly be tweaking, planning, and altering what's being built and who's doing what. That lack of downtime is great because it keeps you engaged. The overworld map is procedural, so you will constantly have to adapt to what types of facilities you can find to loot, and which factions you plan on being friendly with and which ones you will fight. No two games feel exactly the same. The intense micromanagement of your resources ends up being a lot of fun because it puts you in complete control of your shelter as the faction leader. You have all the tools you need to forge your path to eventual victory or utter defeat.
Do not, my friends, become addicted to water. It will take hold of you.
Your faction members have personalities, desires, and several statistics between strength, perception, intelligence, and more. These dictate their effectiveness in several ways. A stronger character can carry more loot, while smarter ones create higher quality items when crafting. Every stat has a ton of perks under each category that's similar to the Fallout series. Some can even grant special attacks that can be used in combat. The combat itself is unique for a colony sim. It's turn-based and the positioning of your team matters. Those up front protect the ones in the back from melee attacks. Different actions consume action points, and characters regain some every turn. You and your enemy can both target specific body parts that can have a variety of effects. Attacks to the head might daze them, while one to the arm might break it. When you combine those factors with the various weapon types, it makes for a fairly deep and enjoyable combat system. At times, your shelter will even come under attack, and you can unleash traps that you've built on the intruders before engaging them, and it all works really well. Combat is frequent enough to break up the experience, but it's also rare enough that it doesn't become tedious or feel grindy. The nature of the combat makes for some incredible weirdness though. The first time I found a handgun, I nearly peed myself in excitement. The first time I used it, I was utterly disappointed. A single swing with a baseball bat does far more damage than a pistol shot, and I get it, it does make sense from a mechanical standpoint. Swinging the bat takes 4 action points, shooting the pistol takes 1. So overall, you get far more damage from the pistol. However, in a relatively realistic and gritty survival game, it looks comical. The enemy's head jerks back 3 times like you just slapped them in the face with a roll of toilet paper before keeling over on the 4th shot. Each of the 6 factions has a unique theme, fighting style, and items for trade, which is pretty neat. They range from the woman-only Black Roses to a clan that honors the old ways, like some kind of group of overly nostalgic millennials that refuse to play anything that isn't Mario or Zelda. You can choose to fight them or attempt to win their favor by completing their missions, and eventually form an alliance. This adds another degree of strategy when dealing with the factions, as being diplomatic has long-term value, but choosing to fight them gains you much-needed supplies now at the cost of making enemies. The game stumbles a bit here as well. Whenever you run into a group on the world map, you are usually presented with the option to fight or flee. Fleeing has a chance of failure, causing you to fight anyway, even if you have a decent reputation with the faction. That can be super frustrating, since you lose reputation for killing them in self-defense. It's also super disconnected from the dialogue, as most of the time they're like, "Fancy meeting you here," then they proceed to turn into Two-Face, flip a coin, and gun you down if it lands on tails.
You live. You die.
While I can appreciate micromanaging resources in the name of allowing the player to handcraft their own survival plan, Sheltered 2's micromanagement bleeds into the rest of the game, and this shoves it into the realm of extreme tedium that's made worse by a poor interface. The only thing you can automate in Sheltered 2 is a survivor's basic needs: eating, showering, sleeping, pooping, whatever. Everything else is done by you ordering them to do so. This is okay when it comes to building or crafting, but nearly every object deteriorates over time and needs to be repaired. Plants need to be watered, and generators need to be refueled. While it can be semi-manageable with just a few survivors and a small shelter, as your population and space grow, it becomes a complete nightmare. The tiny bit of automation that you can assign will actually trip you up and make things worse. You might assign a survivor to refuel the generator because the power is out, then jump to another survivor and have them repair the water purifier, only to find that the first survivor decided to take a nap before refueling the generator. You can disable them from automating needs, but then that piles on even more to micromanage. It's not uncommon to spend in-game days pausing and unpausing time as you click, assign, and reassign simple repairs, garden care, and plant harvesting like some kind of resource-clicking, predatory mobile game. It's exceptionally tedious. The interface offers only a few ways of sorting through your hoard of junk to find what you need. To make matters worse, if you happen to assign someone to create items at one workbench, but then they went pee, and another person you assigned also needs that workbench, it will delete the entire work order off the first survivor, meaning you have to reassign it all over again. Prepping for expeditions is a total nightmare. You choose who is going out, what they are taking in the group inventory, the number of travel rations, and you outfit each and every person going on the expedition. Every single time. There is no way to set character presets or anything like that. You have to scroll through and handpick all of it every time, even if you're sending out the exact same team that just came back 10 seconds ago. At that point, you feel less like a leader playing the role of quartermaster and more like a babysitter running a daycare full of toddlers while the building collapses around you. As a fan of survival games, Sheltered 2 strikes a lot of chords with me. It's a base builder that manages to keep you on the edge of your seat. It requires you to form a long-term strategy because without one, you won't survive your first season change. Keeping tabs on 1,000 small pieces of scrap might be a turnoff for some, but it forced me to make careful decisions about how to play. Sometimes I needed to prioritize water usage with more efficient showers. Other times I had to rely on hunting for food instead of growing it. I had to constantly think about how to power my shelter, and how often I could afford things that weren't strictly required to survive, such as traps. All the mechanics wrap around each other to form a cohesive package. At the same time, the incredible tedium of commanding every minor task drained my will to play a great deal. Expeditions are core to the game, and they're exciting as you explore the world, but I sighed in despair each and every time I had to spend 5 minutes handpicking gear for them with an unhelpful interface. Sheltered 2 offers an apocalyptic survival experience that will put your planning and management skills to the test, alongside nifty turn-based combat. Yet the tedium of such excessive micromanagement might have you wishing for the world to end again.
Oh, somebody kill me, please!
To recap, the pros. It's a challenging survival experience with a focus on resource management. The solid turn-based combat is a neat twist for the genre. There are difficulty settings present, and creating your faction leader lends a personal touch to the apocalypse. The cons. The extremely tedious micromanagement to keep the shelter running. An unhelpful and clunky interface for managing inventories, and the thematic disconnect when it comes to guns and faction interactions. Overall, I give Sheltered 2 a 7.2 out of 10. If you enjoyed this video, liking and subscribing is immensely helpful and helps me out a great deal. I've also left several links down in the description below. One to my website where you can find the bulk of my written content, one to my creator store where you can buy games that support this content, and a link to my Ko-fi page if you feel like tossing in a donation. In any case, thanks for watching, and until next time.